Welcome to lesson 11. In this lesson, we're going to continue developing our resource module plugin that we started in lesson 10. We're going to look at the caching API, and we are going to look at module backup and restores in this lesson. Many REST API services expect clients to cache results, at least for a short period of time, to avoid overloading their servers. So this is even more relevant in our case, because if you consider that if you're in a classroom, there may be 30 or more or around 30, depending on your class size, requests made in a very short period of time to that particular service. So we are going to use caching to actually manage the collection and storage of the content for our module. So let's talk about Moodle caching. There's two aspects to Moodle caching. There's the caching backends, which are the storage bits like MongoDB, APC user cache, and Redis. These are provided by Cache, more specifically Cache Store plugins. Then there's the Moodle Universal Cache, which is using the caching API, which is used in code. The types of caching, these are defined in the cache classes store PHP. And the type of caching we have a request cache. Constant is mode_request, which keeps the content for the duration of the request and is cleared at the end of every request. We also have a session cache, which is the constant is mode_session, which is user specific and alive for the user's session. And then the final one we have is the application cache, which is a shared cache that all the users can access, making all the data accessible for a period of time. It is also possible to create ad hoc caches, but this is not a recommended thing to do. Okay, so in your plugin, you will define your cache requirements in the DB folder in the caches PHP file, and it does require some language strings to be defined. You create a cache with the cache make, calling the static method in the cache class with the make method. You then set the data with your set, and you can also set many, you can set multiple cache objects at the same time. And in reverse, you can get the cached item, or you can get many as well to collect several cached items. And then you delete the cache when you don't need it anymore. Okay, and definition. So this is a definition of the cache that you want to use. So the main ones that you have is the area. So this is the key for your cache item. The mode, so what kind of mode we are talking about: mode application, mode user, a session, or mode request. And then the simple keys and simple data. So this helps with managing the data that is being kept in the cache. If the data is simple, as in it's just pure text or something like that, then you can set the data to true and the simple keys to true if you're only using A to Z, capital and lower cases, and 0 to 9 and underscore. That means there's no need for Moodle to hash the data or the keys to store the cached item. That makes it a little bit quicker, less intense. Okay, and then another one that is useful or worth knowing about is the TTL property or key, which is the time to live. It's not recommended to actually use that. Now, in the case of session and request cache items, they get destroyed at the end of the session or at the end of the request. But for the other ones, the application ones, it is not recommended to use the time to live, because some backends don't really manage that very well, and you should be able to work out when your cache needs updating. Okay, so for more information, there's some links in this presentation. So back in our code, I've closed a couple of of the files because to give us some space, and we're not going to be using them anymore. I've just kept a couple of them open. Right, let's start off by defining our cache. Okay, so that goes in the DB folder, and we need a new file, caches.php. So this is our file, usual stuff at the top, and then there's a link there, quick reference page, see quick reference, create a definition, but we have already discussed that in our presentation. So we are setting our key to Wikipedia data. Our mode is going to be mode application because we want to share that content with the whole class and keep it for as long as possible. We're going to use simple keys because we're going to keep our keys simple, but because our content is HTML and we're never quite sure just what qualifies as simple data, we'll leave it as not being true for simple data. So the default for simple data is false. Okay, and that's all we have to do for defining our cache. And with this, we need to define a language string. Okay, this is our language string here. Cache definition for our Wikipedia data key. Okay, so now in our code we can set, update and delete cache objects, but first we need to get content and then cache it. So we'll need to start off by getting the content. Now this functionality about getting the content will be required both in our lib.php file and in a view PHP file when the user is looking at the content. So we'll need to define our functionality outside of those two files. So what we're going to do is create a classes file, and we'll put our functionality to load the third-party library and make the request and get the data in that class. So let's create that file. So we've got a classes folder already, so we're just going to create the file. We're going to call it snippet.php, and so this is our file, our snippet.php file. We're putting it in our namespace. We're calling our class by the same name as our file name, so it's auto-loaded. And in here, we've got a couple of properties, all static. Properties and functions are all statically declared. So we have our cache time to live, which we're setting here at 24 hours, so a day. And then another property called last error, which is where we will store the last error, the error that was generated in the last call. Okay, and then we have a function in here, a get. Our function is get, and it requires quite a few parameters to come through. So if we look at it, the snippet URL, then no links, no images, include citations. We know what all that stuff is about, don't we? And then we have a debug, so we can pass through a debug flag to generate debugging information, and we return an HTML snippet, which will be the snippet from Wikipedia. So in our function, we load our third-party library. We create an instance of the class of that third-party library. If we are debugging, we set debugging in our third-party libraries code, and then we actually get the wiki content. So we get the content by calling get wiki content in the third-party library and passing through those parameters that we got coming in. Okay, and then if what we get is an error, if that generates an error, we'll notice that by checking if the getter itself as an error, and then we store that in last error if it does, and return null. If everything's in order, we just return the content. Very straightforward, very simple piece of code. So now we can turn our attention back to lib PHP. Now, since we've set the simple keys property in our definition, we can't use like the snippet URL for our data key. As mentioned before, the simple keys consist only of the letters of the alphabet, uppercase or lowercase, 0 to 9, and underscore. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to use the ID of the record that relates to the content that's been collected or cached. That means that we'll have different ones depending on whether images are included. So we could have two cached items, one for the content with no images and no links, and the other for the exact same snippet but with the links, etc. So I think that will work for us, but you might have your own opinion about what would be a better way to go about doing that. So I'm going to add some code in and we'll actually discuss how it works then. So I've added some code in add instance. So we've got the stuff that we've done previously, which was to set up the record, but now we've added in the bit to get the content. So we are calling our mod wiki snippet class snippet with the get, and we're passing the data that we've just worked with that came in, and we've adjusted for the check boxes, and we pass that to our third-party library via our snippet class. Okay, and if we get a snippet, we then store our record, store the data that came with the form, and then we actually cache the content. So we call cache make, passing through our component name, our plugin name, and the key for the definition, and then we set the item, the cached item, the ID of our record, that is the ID that came back from insert record there. And then our data is actually an array. It's an array that includes the time at which we've got the data, so that's been set up there when we came in, and then the actual content in the content area. Okay, and then we just return the ID as we did previously. If there's been an error, we can then catch the error here and raise exceptions for the error. Okay, so that's what's in our add instance. We didn't have to check for existing content because there wouldn't have been. It's a new instance. Yeah. So now let's look at update instance. But before we do, let's define our strings. So we've added a couple of strings here to handle the increased functionality we've added to our libphp. So let's go back to libphp and look at the update instance. So our update instance, same stuff as we had the last time currently. So checking our check boxes, etc. Get the record from the database. We've got updated equals false is a flag, and then we check like we did the last time. We check if there's any changes from what we have in the database. So all the way up to here, if this updated is only set to true if there has been a change. Now before we go and update the record, we then have to check our cache. So we get our cache again. It says make, but really in a sense we are getting, and again we've seen that previously. And then if we haven't updated, so if we've updated, we're going to have to refresh the cache anyway, so we don't need to worry about that. But if the data hasn't been updated, we check the cache. So we get our ID will be the ID of our record. Yep. And then we get that from our cache. Anything that has that ID from our class, we get the value for our time to live, and then we check whether the data in the cache is still fresh, or do we need to update it. If we do have to update it, we'd also set the flag to true. So in a sense, what we're going to do is we're going to restore the data. Okay, so if updated, we get the the content. So we get the content. We get the content from our class again, and then we reset the the cache to the current time. Okay, and then finally we update the record. The other bit we need to do is the actual deletions. So I'll delete function now. So we only get the ID for that. So we get the cache. We make our cache object. We get the ID and we just delete it. So we just call cache delete and just delete that ID, and then we also delete the record from the table. So that's fairly straightforward. So once we've got all this, now to view the actual snippet, we will need a view PHP. So let's go ahead and create that now. So new PHP file called view.php. And this is our file with the usual stuff, again requiring config PHP with forward facing, UI facing. We require the ID. Now the ID that's coming in is not our record ID, it's the course module ID. That's the ID that the course will have issued to the instance. So think of it like an instance ID. Okay, and then we use our friendly, lovely function that gives us both a course and the course module records in one call. By calling that function, we get our snippet ID will be the instance of our course module. That will be our record ID, and then we can actually go and get the record, our snippet record, based on that. Okay, we then make sure that the person is logged in and is entitled to be in the course, etc. And then we do our usual stuff with the page setup, because we're going to generate output. Okay, and then as part of this, we actually check to see if our data is fresh. Okay, so we get our cache, we get the item, the cached item. Not only are we checking that the item is fresh, we are actually getting the content from the cache if it is fresh, and only updating if it isn't fresh. So we check to see whether it's fresh, and then if it is, we actually just set that as our content. If on the other hand it isn't fresh and needs updating, we would then set a flag update required, and we will go ahead and do the same thing we did in libphp, get the content and add it into our, and reset the cache, and then set content to the new content that has come through. We then do our output stuff. Okay, and we then display the content. If there isn't any content, we raise an error and we show the error. We get the last error and we display the error in the actual in the interface. Otherwise, we just simply output the data and end with the footer. So that's fairly straightforward. The only real complication in this view is the actual having to deal with the cache and ensuring that it is fresh. But if you think about it, you might not actually go and update the snippet in using the libphp functionality for a while. You might just add it to your course and forget about it for a year. So you need to ensure that you are updating the content regularly. We could have of course kept that and done that in a scheduled task, for example. So every day ensure that the record is up to date. It's another way to have done it, I suppose. Okay, so that's our simple view PHP file. Now what can we do? We'll upgrade and actually see our module in action. So let's slip across there and do an upgrade, up our version, and let's go and have a look in Moodle. So back in Moodle, we'll log in as admin and upgrade our plugin. Okay, and let's go and add a snippet to a course. So we select our course. Let's take banner topics. Let's turn editing on. Let's add our activity or resource. There's our Wikipedia snippet with the icon. We go in there. Okay, I've already selected the snippet that I'm going to go for, so I'm going to copy that there. Okay, and put a description, so something like that. Okay, and then we'll go down here. Do we want to, let's get the images, let's get the links, and let's include citations if there are any. And so let's go and actually try and save that. So here we go, we've got our description at the top, and we've got the snippet from Wikipedia. So there's a header bit there, our images are in there, and the article is all there. Doesn't look like we have any citations for this for some reason. So that's our snippet, and now it's included in the course and it's been cached, so anybody else coming along to look at this snippet or this resource will get it from the cache until the cache goes stale. So go back to our course. Worthwhile remembering what the CMID of this is, and now I think we're going to switch our attention to backup and restore. So I'm going to log out. So backup and restore. Right, all new functionality should now be using the Moodle 2 backup and restore functionality, which was introduced in Moodle 2.0, so quite a while back. There is still support for Moodle 1 backups, but it's mainly for legacy reasons, I suspect. Anyway, so the supported areas for backup and restores are modules, blocks, admin tools, themes, and reports. And the files that create the backup and do the restore are created and kept in the backup /Moodle 2 directory in your plugins folder. Backups are created with a backup plan, which may include several backup tasks, which in turn may include several backup steps. With the backup, there's two aspects to steps. There's the execution, which is mainly done by the core or is solely done by the core, and the structure, which is within the plugin. Restores are done in the same way. You have a restore plan with one or more restore tasks with one or more restore steps. Okay. So the two main files, there's another file that can be used, but we are not going to talk about it since it's optional and we are not going to be using it. There are two main files involved in backup. So here we're talking just about the backup. Okay, there's the file, the task file, which is task.class.php. You can see the pattern of the file name on the screen, where foobar is your plugin name. Okay, so the other one is the stepslib.php. Okay, so for the task class, that you have to override three functions, three methods. So you define my settings, which is basically used to declare backup settings for the module. Now, a lot of modules do not actually define settings for backup and restore, and so they normally leave this method empty. Then you've got define my steps, and this is typically where the steps for your backup are added using the add step method. And it will normally consist of one or more steps. And then there's another function, encode content links, which encodes links, internal links in any of the content that might be in your settings, etc. So we'll talk about that a little later on. Okay, and then we've got the stepslib, in which the main function is the define structure, which creates a backup nested element instances, basically XML type elements to describe the data for your plugin, and that will call several other methods such as add child, set source table, and prepare activity structure is the final part of the function. Okay. Restore has the same type of same type of files. You've got your task class and your steps lib, and in your task class you have define my settings, define my steps, and then define decode content. So very much the opposite of what we had in the backup. And then there's another one that another function that needs to be overridden, which is the define decode rules. In the steps lib, there's actually three methods that need to be overridden, unlike in the backup. So you have the define structure, the process element name. So this is process each of the elements in your structure, and then the after execute, which is called to deal with things like related files. So there are a number of constants that have been defined, which you use in your backup as you're coding for your backup, and they give you information about the current activity being backed up. So you have things like course var underscore course ID, which gives you the course ID, and you, other ones are section ID, activity ID, the module ID. You also have the module name and block name, the context ID, and the parent ID. That's the parent ID of the item that is currently being created, the structure that's currently being created. And as I mentioned earlier, sort of like XML, you can use XPath to actually get to another part or get information from another part of what will eventually be an XML file. Okay. So there's some links to the backup documentation or backup and restore documentation on the Moodle site. The main two ones are the ones I've got in bold on there. Now, they are fairly old documents. They were written at the time when the Moodle 2 backup and restore was being developed. I don't know how much more has been added since then, but they give you quite a lot of information and a good example of how you write backup and restore. So our instance, our backup and restore is going to be a simple one, which will give you the basic concepts of doing a backup and restore for a module. But I would suggest that you actually, after doing that, go and read these documents, because they'll give you a better insight to backup and restore. So back in our code, let's get started on doing our backup and restore. Now, if you did have a peek at the two links that were in the presentation on the backup pages, there are a couple of hints on there to help you make life easier as you develop backup and restore for your modules. So the first thing is a configuration setting, and I'll show you that in config dist. So let's go and pick out config dist, and I'll just search for the setting. Okay. So this is the setting, keep temp directories on backup, and you put that in your config PHP and set it to true, and that will keep the temp files that are normally deleted when backups being done, and then we can look at what's being produced. Okay, so put that into your config.php file. And the other thing is creating two small scripts so that will allow us to just back up our module and restore our module, and these need to live in the root folder of your Moodle installation. So not in your plugins directory, not in our Wikipedia snippet directory, but in the main Moodle directory. So we'll go ahead, I'll close this file, and we'll go ahead by creating the first one, PHP file, and we're going to call it course backup. You can call it whatever you want really, because you're going to run it from the command line anyway. So this is our file. We define that it's a command line script. We require the config PHP, and we require one of the backup includes files that give us the access to the backup controller. And then here we will put in the module, the name, the ID of our module. not the record number, but the CMID, which we noted earlier when we created our module. We have our user doing the backup, which is the ID of the admin account, which is normally 2, and then we just call the backup controller with the set constants there and our 2 variables that we've just set, and then we execute the plan. Okay. So the other file is course restore. I'm going to call it course restore. Like I said, you can call it whatever you want. So let's do that. So this is our file, a little bit more elaborate than the backup. So we still define our command line script. We require the config, and then we get the restore includes PHP, which will then give us access to our restore controller. This time we use a transaction to ensure that if there's any failures, the course isn't created and it rolls completely back. And then this is the folder in the temp folder where our temporary files will be living. So this will change every time we run the backup, and we'll need to change that when we actually do our backup. So this is we could have made it a little bit better and passed that in as a command line argument, I suppose, but this is what it is. We only want it for a temporary for temporary reasons anyway. Then the category ID, I've just chosen one, which is the miscellaneous default category in our Moodle instance. You can obviously change that, create an extra category where you want to do your restores to. User doing restore, again, stuck it on the admin user, and then we need a course ID. So we call the functionality to create a course as part of the restore. So and we're going to call the course restored course 2, and it will have that as its short name, and it will be in that category. Yeah, and then we'll have our restore controller called with the various variables that we've set, and some of the other constants there. They do a pre-check, we do a pre-check, and then we do execute of the plan, and then allow commit. So now we've got to tell Moodle that we support backup. So we need to do that in our lib file. I'll just close off a couple of files here to give us some space. So ones we're not likely to use again. Okay, and we'll go to our lib file. This is where we need to come up to our function here, Wikipedia supports, and add in the feature for the Moodle backup. And this is it there, feature backup Moodle. So now we can turn our attention to actually creating the backup and restore files. So let's go back to our folder. Okay, and we need a new folder, or new folders anyway, which will be backup Moodle 2. So our first file is our steps lib file. So let's do a PHP file. So we've got backup, Wikipedia snippet, stepslib.php. So this is our file with the usual stuff at the top. Okay, and our structure, our class extends backup activity structure step, and we call our class backup with our Frankenstyle name in the middle there, Wikipedia snippet activity structure step, and that's how you need to define the actual class. Okay, and then we have our function define structure. So this is the only method we actually need to override in the extended class. Okay, so the first bit here that I've got commented out, if we had user information, if we had tables that stored user information, then we would want to know whether the user who's doing the backup wants to include user information in the backup. So this would be called in that case, and that would give you a value I think it's a Boolean value that will say that the user is looking for user information. Okay, then we define each of the element structures, and basically what we're doing is creating an XML structure defining what our tables look like, or the data that's going to be backed up looks like. So we have a nested element that we're calling Wikipedia snippet. We're using the ID of the data as the attribute, ID attribute for that particular nested element. And then in here, I'll just take that out of the way for a bit. You can see the names of our fields, name, intro, etc. So there are two fields that are missing in our array, the ID, which we've used as the attribute, because that will change, and the course ID, which we know will change. So our course field is not mentioned in here, and we handle both the ID and course in the restore side of things. Okay, because those two values are going to change. Okay, and then we define where the data that's going into these nested elements comes from. And then basically we set a source table, because it's simple, it's coming from a single table. We've got Wikipedia snippet. Oh, before I jump to that, we can build a tree. So if we had children or connected tables, we would then define them here. I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, and then we tell the backup where this data is going to come from, the source of the data, and basically we tell it the table, that's the name of our table, and then how to actually find the data. So our ID, and this is the ID of the activity being backed up currently. Okay, so that's the one of the constants we spoke about in the presentation. Okay, there are other possibilities for defining where your data comes from. You can use a SQL, set some SQL SQL statements or commands where you can do something a bit more fancy to get a more complex structure for your data. Or you can use set source array, which is when you have fixed information to back up. Not really very useful. I doubt it's used very often, but there's another way to define data to go into your nested element. Then we have annotations, ID annotation. This is a little bit more difficult to explain, but basically where you have in your data any field that's pointing to another ID that belongs elsewhere. So for example, if in our data we had a user ID, we would need to annotate that the user ID field points to a user, and these are the ones that are most commonly used for annotation. So if you got any data in your tables or in your data that points to a user, a grouping, a group, a role, a scale that's to do with gradings, or an outcome, you would then want to annotate that the actual value of that data needs to come from one of those things. So for example, just thinking about it, if let's say you are backing up with user ID and the course was being restored in a brand new Moodle instance, another instance, not the one that originates it, then a user would be created, and therefore you would have a new user ID for the user that's in your data, and this will help with with tying up that user and your data. Okay, and then we have file annotations. Again, this is optional, but where you have anything that may include files, or if your module actually works with files, this is where you would come and define and annotate files. So in this case, our intro element, which is a text, one of those HTML text boxes, etc., allows the user to upload, let's say, images or other files into the data. So you would then now use this to to define or mark those files as being part of your plugin's backup. So the intro element doesn't use item ID, so we don't tie the files to the actual record itself. It basically uses the context to find the file. So we don't need to do we're passing null because we're not having to tie it to an item ID. Okay, it's a little bit hard to explain, but if you look at the documentation later on after doing this backup activity, you will then get an idea of how this actually works together. And then we return the prepare activity structure, which builds up a nice XML structure to go in the file. Okay, so let's look at one that's a little bit more complicated than this, because it's hard to explain when you don't have examples. So let's go and have a look at the chat. So the chat one, and let's take its backup, and we want the steps lib. Yep. And let's have a look at what they've done. So same thing as us, extending and then overriding the defined structure. Now chat does use user info, does maintain user info, so there's a check done to make sure to see whether the backup needs to include the user info. So then we look at the different the structure. So we have a backup nested element, chat, again using the ID as the attribute, the ID as an attribute for each one, and then the field names. Again, notice no course there, though there would be a course field in the table. And then it creates a new backup nested element called messages, and then another one called message. So and that's from another table. So we have the chat table and the message table. This gives you a structure. The messages is a structure, because what happens later, we'll talk about that later, is that you define the structure, build a tree with those structures. So there's a couple of things they're doing here that you wouldn't normally be dealing with anyway in your plugin. It seems to be something specific to chat. It says it's not cool to have two tags with the same name, so they're changing one of the tags. Renamed IS system to system for backward compatibility. So these are things that are specific to this particular backup. And then this is where the tree is being built. So our main one, chat, as the child, messages, which is what we created here. Okay, and then messages add child with each message. So that's a structure being built. Okay, and then we have our source table, again very similar to ours, very simple. But then if user info is required, then the messages as well need to be stored in the backup. So then you get the chat messages, and we look at the parent ID. Now the parent ID will be the parent ID from here, so you have an idea of what's being done here. So it's building up the connection between the two tables. And then you have the ID annotation. So annotate IDs. So user ID, which is in this table, and group ID are both being annotated here. So we know annotate IDs, this user for the field user ID, annotate user ID group for the group ID in the tables as well. And then we have the annotate files for the intro element as well, just like we did, and then return prepare activity structure. So that's the chat one. I'll close that and we'll go back and do the task file in our plugin. So we create our new file. Now you need to be very careful with the naming of this file. I've been caught out of this quite a lot of times. It is task.class.php and everything else is an underscore with our name in it. Okay. Right, so this is our file. Usual stuff at the top. We need to require our own backup steps lib. So we need to require it. And then we are extending backup activity task with our class, which is backup Wikipedia snippet activity task. You can see the pattern there is just with our name in the middle of it. Okay, and then we are overriding 3 methods. Okay, so the first one, define my settings. We're not doing anything with. As I mentioned in the presentation, this would be for settings but for our plugin for backup, and we're not using it. Most plugins don't. Okay, and then we have define my steps, and we are actually calling our own class, and in our constructor we are passing through these 2 parameters here. So we're calling our own class, which is why we needed to require the file, and then adding it as a step, passing through the structure, name of the structure, and the file in which the structure will be put. Okay, and then the last method we need to override is encode content links. We get given some content and we return content. We're not doing anything with it. So let's have a look at the chat version of this file and see what's different. So we'll go back to our chat and we'll go for our task. Okay, and this is it. So the same thing, they're requiring the steps lib, they extending the backup activity task again with the functions, the methods that need overriding. Define my settings, again empty, and then define my steps. And even though it's a little bit more complicated in the steps, all that's required is adding 1 step from the steps lib and passing through the parameters to the constructor. Okay, so they have the encode content links, which is a bit more complicated than our one. The content is coming in, they are escaping the links in the content so that it doesn't break the regular expressions that are going to follow, and then they replace each of the links in the content with a pattern. So that's the kind of thing they're doing here. So this will be used to decode these links and point back to the actual chat that's being created. Okay, I don't know if that makes sense, but you'll see it a little later on when we look at the restore. So let's close this file and let's actually go and do a backup of our module. So we'll just close this as well, and then come back to our folder, and then let's do a backup of our module. So I have changed the course module ID in our course backup file to point to our module in Moodle. So I'm just going to run course backup and we'll see what happens. So we have some stuff here on the screen saying looks like it went okay, and this first one at the top here, that's the folder that will exist in your Moodle data directory. So let me open that and we'll have a look at what's in there. Okay, so this is our temp folder with our backup, and you'll notice that it's in the Moodle data temp backup folder, and in there you will have a series of XML files. So these ones here are for the whole course. As you can see, these are all the questions, the roles, the scales, the users, etc. And then we have a folder activities, and in there we have our module, the Wikipedia snippet. The 106 is actually the CMID of the activity in the course, and then we have specific XML files for each of the specific activities or for our actual module. And this is our file. This is the file that we defined in our backup. So let's have a look at that. So this is the file. It's an XML file, as I said. And so we have it there. We have activity ID equals 1. I'm not quite sure what that means, but because our ID for our record is this one here. Okay, and then we have the module ID, the module name, and the context ID. So these are things that when you use the constants, you actually can get hold of these values. So you know the constants that we defined, that we talked about in the presentation. And then we've got our name, and then the data that the data from our record, as it were. So that's all it's basically done. It's built up a XML structure for the data. Okay, right. So now that we've got the file in place, let's go and look at our restore functionality. Okay, I'm going to close this, and I'm going to close these other ones here to give us a bit of space to operate in. And then here we might as well put in our folder now. So we'll just save that. The rest of it can stay the same. And then let's create our restore files in our Moodle backup Moodle 2 directory. So our new first file is the restore Wikipedia snippet steps lib php. So this is our file with the usual stuff at the top. And then we are extending restore activity structure step, and following the pattern, our class name includes our module name in it. And then we have a few methods that we need to override. So we've got the define structure. And we define the paths that need to be restored from the XML. So our activity Wikipedia snippet will restore, and the path name is going to be called Wikipedia snippet. And then we return prepare activity structure. So that's the structure. And then for each of the paths, there will be a call made to a function called process underscore, and then the name of the function. So we've got our restore element path there was Wikipedia snippet. So process Wikipedia snippet with the data that is in the XML coming through. We make sure that it's an actual object, and then we get the course ID. This is our new course ID. So this is the data that the XML had defined. Okay, we are now adding in the missing field course and get course ID. So we've got the course ID in there, and then we are also changing the time created and the time modified. So we could have actually left them out of the actual backup because we're going to replace them anyway. So we've done that. Okay. Now, as a little bit of a complication, but if let's say you need to offset your dates, so basically your dates need to change based on the creation of the course, then you would call this function apply date offset and offset the date based on your old data as compared to the new data. So it applies the offset that you had in your old data to the offset, it applies it to the new date. Okay, then we have then we insert it into the table. So we create a new we insert that data into the table. Okay, we'll get a new item ID because obviously it's a new record, and then we call apply activity instance. Okay, we need to call it, right? And then after execute, we're calling after execute to deal with the files that may have been introduced by the intro element in our in our record. Okay, so let's look at the chat version of this file. So it's our steps lib. Let's go back to chat and into the backup module 2 folder, and we want the chat restore. Okay, and the same kind of thing being done. Okay, our define structure, again needing to know whether user info is actually being provided, and then we have a restore path to activity chat, and then user info. If user info is required, we have another restore path for the chat message, and that will be living in that path in the XML file. Okay, and then again prepare activity structure. Now for each chat message and chat, we have process chat and process chat message, and the data will come through. So they get the global DB, obviously, because we're going to put it into the database. Make sure that the data is an object. Take the old ID from the data ID, and again get the course ID. Now I'm not quite sure why they are calling the old ID is being used later on. I think to do with the mapping of the XML, but we'll see. Okay, mapping of the content, of the links. Okay, then we are applying applying a chat time offset for the chat time, and then inserting the record in the chat table. Okay, similar to what we did, not much more complicated than what we've done. And then we have process chat message, and again the same kind of thing, getting the old ID, and then there's a little bit more being done here. So remember the annotations. So we get new parent ID chat, so the chat ID is the parent ID that's being created there. We get the mapping ID for the user based on the user ID, get mapping ID for the data for the group ID. So this has got to do with your annotations made previously. And then we are setting the remember they did something to change the name because of duplicate names, etc. So they're mapping that back to message and mapping that back to is system from data system. So you can see what they've done here is remapped everything to the fields that are going to go into the chat messages table. Okay, and then they set a mapping. Okay, and the mapping chat ID, the old ID is being mapped to the new ID, and this is because of decode. Okay, so they've set a mapping which will then give it define something that you can call with get mapping ID. So that's the process chat messages. And then again the after execute to deal with the files that may have been introduced by the intro element. Okay, so let's close this and let's go and do the other file that we require for restoring. So I'll close this and we'll go down back to our folder and create a new file. So again, be careful with the name. It is quite long. You need that task.class.php. So that's our file. So that's our file. Again, we need to require our steps lib. Okay, we are extending the restore activity task. Again, following the pattern with our module name in there. That's our class name. Define settings, nothing for us here. Define steps. We then calling our class constructor, and very similar to what we did with the backup, passing it the name of the file and the structure, and we add it as a step. We then have two other functions we need to override in our restore. Define decode contents, okay, which is we're returning an empty array, and define code rules, we are defining an empty array. So we were not really doing anything with these. Okay, so now let's have a look at the chat one and see how that actually looks compared to ours. So let's go back up to chat and look at the restore chat activity. So here again, they are requiring the steps lib, extending the same restore activity task. So define settings, nothing in there. Define my steps, just like us. And in the backup, not much going on here. You've got chat structure and then the chat XML. So adding that as a step. Okay, this is where it gets a bit interesting. So we are now looking at what's this? At decoding the links that were coded in our backup. So this defines the contents in the activity that must be processed by the link decoder. So we are saying that the chat, the data for intro needs to be sent through for decoding, and in the chat messages, the actual message itself needs to be sent through for decoding. So you return those, and then what happens is they are called. The content is sent through for decoding. So you set some rules, and the restore rules. So the chat by view by ID, if you remember, that was what they were doing in the encoding of the links. So we had that chat view by ID and chat index, and then there's a kind of replacement thing going on. So chat view by ID needs to be replaced with this in the course module, and the same with chat index, replaced by that. $1 will be the ID of the actual record itself. Okay, and these are the rules. So they've defined the decode rules. Now this bit here, I think is kind of interesting. This is restoring log rules. So logs, course logs here, which we haven't bothered with in our code, but might be something you need to look at when you read the documentation. You probably get to understand what this is. But this is basically restoring logs. I'm not going to go through them. And then we are, again, to do with logs, and again, I'm not going to go through that now. Okay, so we'll close this, and let's go see if we can restore our module. Okay, so I'm going to close this. Then if we remember, we've already set this to the right ID. So let's go and restore our course. So back on the command line, let's restore our course. So that looks like it's worked okay. So let's go and have a look in Moodle and see if we have actually restored our module at least. So I'll log in as admin, and we'll go to the site administration courses, and let's manage courses. And if we look in miscellaneous, we have a restored course here. And you'll notice that it's actually grayed out. It's not actually active, so it doesn't make it active straight away. Okay, so let's go and view the course, and in here we have our module restored. Okay, so this is where we'll leave the backup and restore. And we are now going to just go and review what we've done in this lesson. And so that is it for lesson 11. We continued our development of the resource module plugin and completed it. We looked at the caching API, and we looked at module backup and restores.